There comes a moment when you realize the pain was never about weakness, it was about proximity. You were close to someone who fed on control, validation, and silence, and you mistook endurance for love. But today is not about naming them. Today is about awakening you, because the most powerful way to make a narcissist regret everything is not through revenge, arguments, or explanations. It is through transformation, so complete that your absence becomes the loudest consequence they ever face. A narcissist thrives on reaction. They need your confusion, your tears, your endless attempts to explain yourself. They need to feel central in your emotional universe. The moment you stop orbiting them, something collapses inside their carefully constructed world. That is why your first step is not confrontation, but clarity. You must understand that closure does not come from them admitting wrong, apologizing, or changing. Closure comes when you stop waiting for them to become someone they are not. The regret begins when you withdraw your belief that they were the source of your worth. There is a quiet but radical shift that happens the moment you stop reacting. And that shift is where your power truly begins. Reaction is the currency a narcissist survives on. Every emotional response, every attempt to defend yourself, every explanation you give to prove your innocence feeds the illusion that they still control the emotional temperature of your life. When you react, you remain entangled. Your energy stays locked in a loop of justification and pain. But the moment you choose not to react, something breaks, not in you, but in the system that once drained you. Not reacting does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you are unaffected. It means you no longer allow your emotions to be weaponized against you. A narcissist studies reactions the way a manipulator studies leverage. They learn what makes you angry, what makes you cry, what makes you chase clarity. They provoke not because they are confused, but because they are strategic. When you react, they feel significant. When you stop, they feel exposed. Calm becomes unsettling to someone who thrives on chaos. This is where clarity replaces confusion. Instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? You begin to see this is who they are. That realization alone dissolves much of their power. You stop personalizing behavior that was never about you. You stop internalizing blame that was never yours. And as your clarity sharpens, your emotional responses soften. You begin to pause before speaking. You choose silence over self-betrayal. You observe instead of absorb. That pause is not weakness, it is mastery. The discipline of non-reaction is not easy at first. Your nervous system has been trained to respond quickly because you were often forced into defense mode. You were conditioned to explain yourself, to prove your intentions, to fix misunderstandings that were deliberately created. When you stop reacting, your body may initially feel uncomfortable. Anxiety may rise, guilt may whisper that you are being cold or unfair. But this discomfort is a sign of detox, not danger. You are unlearning survival patterns that no longer serve you as you practice non-reaction. Something powerful happens internally. You reclaim choice. Instead of being pulled into emotional storms, you choose how close you stand to them. You realize you do not owe access to your emotions to someone who repeatedly misused them. You do not owe instant replies. You do not owe explanations to people committed to misunderstanding you. Each time you choose calm over reaction, you reinforce your self-respect. From the narcissist's perspective, this change is deeply unsettling. They are used to being the center of emotional gravity. Your anger made them feel important. Your tears made them feel powerful. Your explanations made them feel superior. When those reactions disappear, they are left without feedback. Silence becomes a mirror they cannot control. They may escalate behavior, provoke harder, accuse you of changing, or attempt to bait you emotionally. This is not because you are doing something wrong, but because the old tactics are failing. What looks like indifference on the outside is actually alignment on the inside. You are no longer scattered. Your energy is no longer leaking into unnecessary battles. You begin to feel grounded, present, and steady. This steadiness is not passive. It is intentional. It says, without words, I am no longer available for dysfunction. And that message lands harder than any argument ever could. Non-reaction also restores your dignity. You stop explaining your worth to someone who benefits from doubting it. You stop arguing facts with someone committed to distortion. You stop trying to win conversations that were designed to confuse you. In doing so, you return to yourself. Your inner voice grows clearer. Your intuition becomes louder. You trust your experience without needing external validation. Over time, this shift changes how you are perceived, not just by the narcissist, but by yourself. You see that strength is not found in emotional intensity, but in emotional regulation. You discover that power is not loud, it is composed. And in that composure, your life begins to expand. You have more energy for growth, creativity, and meaningful connections. You are no longer emotionally exhausted from battles that never led anywhere. The deepest irony is this: by not reacting, you stop trying to make them feel something, and in doing so, you create the very consequence they fear most: irrelevance. They are no longer the center of your emotional world. They no longer dictate your mood. They no longer control the narrative of your inner life. That loss is profound, even if they never admit it. So when you stop reacting, you are not giving up. You are taking back. You are reclaiming your time, your peace, your identity. You are choosing yourself over chaos. And in that choice, your power returns, not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. There is a subtle trap that keeps many people emotionally bound far longer than the relationship itself. And that trap is the belief that closure must come from the person who caused the wound. You wait for an apology that never arrives, an explanation that finally makes sense, or an admission of wrong that validates your pain. This waiting feels reasonable, even necessary, but in reality, it hands your healing over to someone who has already proven they cannot be trusted with it. Closure that depends on a narcissist is closure that will always be delayed, distorted, or denied. The moment you understand that closure is self-given, something shifts inside you. You stop standing at the door of someone else's conscience, hoping they will open it. Narcissists are deeply invested in preserving their self-image. Admitting fault threatens the identity they work tirelessly to protect. This is why accountability feels impossible with them, not because you did not explain yourself well enough, but because their psychology is built to avoid responsibility. Recognizing this truth is not pessimistic, it is liberating. Self-given closure begins with acceptance, not of what happened as acceptable, but of what happened as real. You stop minimizing the harm. You stop rewriting history to make it easier to swallow. You allow yourself to say without apology, "That hurt me and it mattered." This honesty with yourself becomes the foundation of healing. You no longer need them to agree with your reality for it to be valid. Then comes the decision to stop chasing understanding from someone who benefits from your confusion. Each attempt to get clarity from a narcissist often results in more gaslighting, more blame shifting, and more self-doubt. You leave those conversations feeling smaller, not clearer. When you step out of that cycle, you reclaim mental space. You realize that understanding their motives will not heal you nearly as much as understanding your own boundaries. Self-given closure also involves grieving the fantasy you held on to. You grieve who you hoped they would become, the relationship you imagined, and the version of yourself you were when you believed love could fix everything. This grief is painful, but it is honest and honed. Style heals faster than hope misplaced in the wrong hands. When you let go of the fantasy, you make room for reality. And reality, while sometimes disappointing, is grounding. As you practice giving yourself closure, you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and begin asking, "Why did I tolerate less than I deserved?" This reframing is powerful. It moves you out of shame and into self-compassion. You begin to see that your willingness to love deeply was never the flaw. The flaw was staying in a dynamic where love was used as leverage instead of connection. There's a quiet strength that develops when you no longer need someone else to validate your pain. You stop retelling the story in hopes that someone will finally say, "You were right. You already know you were hurt. You already know you tried." That knowing becomes enough. And when it is enough, the emotional grip loosens. From the outside, it may look like you simply moved on. But internally, something far more significant has occurred. You have taken authority over your own healing. You are no longer emotionally negotiating with someone who refused to meet you halfway. This is not bitterness, it is maturity. It is the recognition that peace is more valuable than proof. For the narcissist, this shift is deeply unsettling, even if they are not consciously aware of it. When you stop seeking closure from them, you remove a role they enjoyed, the role of judge over your worth and feelings. They are no longer the gatekeeper of your healing. You no longer need them to say sorry for you to say, "I'm done." that loss of influence is significant. Self-giving closure does not mean the memories disappear or that the pain instantly dissolves. It means the pain no longer defines your direction. You stop walking backward into the past looking for answers. You start walking forward, carrying lessons instead of wounds. You integ. Rate the experience into your life story without allowing it to dominate the next chapter. Ultimately, closure is not a conversation. It is a choice to stop waiting, a choice to stop hoping for a different ending from the same script, a choice to honor your experience without needing permission. When you make that choice, you step into a new kind of freedom, one where your peace is not contingent on someone else's awareness, remorse, or change. And in that freedom, healing finally begins to move. There's a kind of silence that feels empty, heavy, and avoidant. And then there is a silence that is full of strength, clarity, and self-respect. The third keynote lives in this second kind of silence. This is not the silence of fear or punishment. It is the silence that comes when you finally understand that your peace is more valuable than being heard by someone who has already decided not to listen. When silence is rooted in self-respect, it becomes transformative. For a long time, you may have believed that speaking more would fix things. You explained your intentions, clarified your words, defended your character, and tried to resolve misunderstandings that never truly existed. With a narcissist, conversations are rarely about resolution. They are about dominance, control, and emotional leverage. Every word you offer becomes material to twist, minimize, or weaponize. Eventually, you realize that speaking more does not bring clarity, it brings exhaustion. This is where self-respecting silence begins. It starts the moment you stop trying to convince someone of your reality. You no longer feel the need to justify your feelings or narrate your pain in hopes of empathy. Not because your pain disappeared, but because you finally accepted that this person is incapable of holding it with care. Silence becomes an act of self-honoring. It says, I will not bleed eye in front of someone who enjoys watching me explain the wound. This kind of silence is powerful because it removes the emotional supply a narcissist depends on. They thrive on engagement, arguments, tears, emotional reactions, and long explanations. Silence interrupts that cycle. It creates a vacuum where there used to be noise. And in that vacuum, their control weakens. They may interpret your silence as arrogance, coldness, or abandonment, but the truth is simpler. You chose peace over performance. Self-respecting silence also allows your nervous system to settle. When you are constantly explaining yourself, your body stays in a state of alert. You are bracing for attack, dismissal, or manipulation. Silence gives your body a break. It allows you to return to yourself. You start noticing how much energy you were spending on conversations that never nourished you. With that energy reclaimed, healing begins quietly but deeply. This silence does not mean you lack a voice. It means you're choosing where and with whom to use it. You stop pouring your truth into a place where it evaporates. Instead, you save your voice for people who listen, respect, and respond with care. This discernment is not cruelty. It is wisdom earned through pain. You learn that not every battle deserves your words, and not every person deserves access to your inner world. For the narcissist, this silence is deeply uncomfortable. They are used to being able to provoke a response. When that response disappears, they feel destabilized. They may escalate their behavior, accuse you of changing, or attempt to bait you back into conversation. But your silence, when grounded in self-respect, is steady. It is not reactive. It is not dramatic. It is consistent. And consistency communicates finality more clearly than any speech ever could. Inside you, something shifts as well. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing whether you said the right thing or explained it well enough. You understand that the right people do not require constant clarification of your worth. This realization strengthens your identity. You feel less scattered, less drained, and more centered. Silence becomes a boundary that protects your emotional core. There is also a grief that comes with this silence. You grieve the connection you hope communication would create. You grieve the version of the relationship that might have existed if mutual respect were possible. Allowing yourself to feel this grief without rushing to fill the space with words is part of the transformation. Silence gives grief room to move through you instead of being trapped in endless conversations that go nowhere. Over time, the silence changes the narrative. You are no longer the one chasing resolution. You are no longer the one pleading to be understood. You become the one who chose dignity, and that choice echoes. It echoes in your posture, your tone, your decisions, and your future relationships. You no longer confuse loudness with strength. You understand that true strength often moves quietly. The most profound impact of self-respecting silence is internal. You realize you do not need to announce your healing for it to be real. You do not need to explain your boundaries for them to matter. Your peace does not require permission. Silence becomes the space where you reconnect with yourself, where your intuition grows louder, and where your self-worth stabilizes. In the end, this silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is full of clarity, self-respect, and resolve. It is the silence of someone who has learned that their energy is sacred. And when you honor that, transformation is inevitable, not just for you, but in the way your absence speaks louder than your presence ever had. There is a profound shift that occurs when you stop trying to manage someone else's behavior and start taking responsibility for your own protection. This is where boundaries enter, not as weapons, not as threats, but as quiet, firm decisions that reshape your life. Boundaries are not announcements, they are actions. They do not require permission, explanation, or agreement. They simply exist, and in their existence, they change everything. For a long time, you may have believed that if you just explained your limits clearly enough, the other person would finally respect them. But with a narcissist, explanations often become invitations for debate, manipulation, or dismissal. They hear boundaries as challenges rather than guidelines. This is why the fourth keynote is not about saying more, but about doing differently. When you set a boundary and follow through consistently, you communicate something words never could. You are serious about protecting your peace. Boundaries create loss of control for a narcissist, and loss of control is deeply threatening to them. They are accustomed to shaping narratives, pushing limits, and adjusting rules to suit their needs. When you stop allowing this flexibility, when your no remains no without justification, they feel destabilized. This destabilization is not cruelty. It is the natural consequence of someone no longer having unlimited access to you. What makes boundaries powerful is not their intensity, but their consistency. You do not need to be harsh. You do not need to be dramatic. You simply need to be reliable. When you say you will leave a conversation, if it becomes disrespectful, you leave. When you decide not to respond to manipulative messages, you do not respond. Each time you follow through, you reinforce your self-respect. Each time you waver, you teach others how to bypass your limits. At first, setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable, even frightening. You may fear being labeled selfish, cold, or unloving. Narcissists often exploit this fear, accusing you of changing or abandoning them. But boundaries are not abandonment, they are self-preservation. You are not responsible for how someone reacts to your limits. You are responsible for honoring your own well-being. This distinction is crucial for healing. As you maintain boundaries, you begin to notice a shift within yourself. You feel less anxious. You stop anticipating conflict. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Your energy, once spent on managing someone else's emotions, becomes available for your own growth. This internal peace is one of the earliest signs that your boundaries are working. You are no longer living in constant reaction mode. For the narcissist, boundaries expose a truth they work hard to avoid. They cannot control everyone. When their usual tactics fail, charm, guilt, intimidation, they may escalate. They may test you repeatedly, looking for cracks. This is not a sign that your boundary is wrong. It is a sign that it's effective. The moment you remain consistent through these tests, something clicks. They realize the old dynamics no longer apply. Boundaries also redefine your sense of responsibility. You stop feeling obligated to fix, rescue, or accommodate. You recognize that adults are responsible for their own emotions. This realization frees you from guilt. You begin to see how much of your life was shaped around avoiding someone else's discomfort at the expense of your own. Boundaries reverse that pattern. Over time, these boundaries create a normal. You no longer feel the need to announce them because your behavior speaks for itself. You become selective with your time, your energy, and your emotional availability. This selectivity is not arrogance, it is discernment. You understand? That access to you is a privilege, not a right. The deepest impact of boundaries is not what they do to the narcissist, but what they do to you. You begin to trust yourself. You see that you can protect your peace without collapsing into guilt or fear. Your confidence grows quietly but steadily. And as your self-trust strengthens, so does your self-respect. In the end, boundaries are not about control. They are about clarity. They clarify what you will tolerate and what you will not. They clarify your values. They clarify your worth. And in that clarity, the dynamic shifts permanently. The narcissist loses control, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped making yourself available for misuse. And that loss of control, born from your consistency, becomes a consequence they cannot ignore. There is a damage that narcissistic relationships inflict that goes far deeper than arguments or betrayal. It reaches into identity itself. Slowly, subtly, you begin to doubt your memory, your intuition, your feelings, and eventually your worth. You question whether you are too sensitive, too demanding, too much. This erosion does not happen overnight, and healing it does not either. But the moment you begin rebuilding your identity, the narcissist's influence starts to collapse. Healing your identity means reclaiming the parts of yourself that were slowly handed over in the name of keeping peace. You remember how often you silenced your needs to avoid conflict, how often you second-guessed your instincts because they were dismissed or mocked. Over time, you learned to distrust yourself. This self-distrust became the narcissist's strongest grip. When you begin to trust yourself again, that grip weakens. The first layer of this healing is believing your own experience. You stop asking others to confirm whether what you went through is really that bad. You stop minimizing the impact because someone else had it worse. Your pain does not need comparison to be valid. When you allow yourself to fully acknowledge what you felt without judgment or justification, you take back authority over your inner world. That authority is something a narcissist cannot tolerate because it means you are no longer dependent on their version of reality. As your identity heals, your intuition becomes louder. You begin to notice subtle red flags you once ignored. Your body responds faster than your mind. You sense when something feels off, and instead of pushing that feeling away, you listen. This self-trust is transformative. Narcissists rely on confusion. When confusion fades, so does their power. Rebuilding identity also means reconnecting with values that were compromised. You remember who you were before everything revolved around managing someone else's moods. You reconnect with your creativity, your faith, your ambition, your kindness, not as tools for survival, but as expressions of who you are. This reconnection brings a quiet confidence. You no longer need to perform to be accepted. You simply exist as yourself. As this inner alignment strengthens, your behavior naturally changes. You speak more clearly. You hesitate less. You no longer over-explain. These changes are not strategies. They are byproducts of self-trust. And to a narcissist, this is deeply unsettling. They were comfortable with the version of you that questioned itself. They are threatened by the version of you that stands firmly in self-awareness. There is also grief in this healing. You grieve the time you lost, doubting yourself. You grieve the choices you made while disconnected from your inner voice. Allowing this grief without turning it into self-blame is part of reclaiming identity. You understand that you did the best you could with the awareness you had. Compass C. On for your past self becomes a bridge to your present strength. As your identity solidifies, you stop needing approval to feel secure. Compliments feel nice but are no longer necessary. Criticism no longer shatters you. You develop an inner anchor that remains steady regardless of external reactions. This anchor changes everything. You are no longer easily manipulated by praise or guilt. You no longer shrink to keep someone else comfortable. From the narcissist's perspective, this is a loss of influence they cannot reverse. They may attempt to reassert control by reminding you of who you used to be, by questioning your growth, or by accusing you of becoming cold or arrogant. But these attempts fail because they are aimed at a version of you that no longer exists. Your healing has changed the terrain. The most powerful aspect of identity healing is that it is not performative. You do not need to announce your growth. You do not need to prove anything. Your presence carries a different energy. You are grounded. You are clear. You are self-directed. This quiet strength speaks louder than any declaration. Over time, you notice that your relationships improve across the board. You attract people who respect you because you respect yourself. You no longer tolerate dynamics that require self-abandonment. This new standard is not rigid, it is healthy, and it becomes the foundation for lasting peace. In the end, healing your identity is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to who you were before you learned to doubt yourself. When you do this, the narcissist's influence dissolves naturally, not because you fought them, but because there is nothing left for them to control. Your sense of self is whole again, and wholeness is something manipulation cannot penetrate. There is a response, more powerful than arguments, explanations, or even distance and that response is growth. Not the kind of growth that is loud or performative, but the kind that reshapes your life so thoroughly that the past can no longer reach you. Growth is unsettling to a narcissist because it contradicts the story they told themselves about you. They needed to believe you were dependent, incomplete, or incapable without them. When you grow, you become living proof that their narrative was false. At first, growth begins quietly. You start investing energy where it was once drained. Instead of replaying old conversations in your head, you redirect your focus toward your goals, your health, your faith, your skills. You begin asking yourself different questions, not how do I fix this relationship, but what kind of life do I want to build? This shift alone changes your trajectory. Your attention moves from survival to creation. As you grow, your time becomes fuller. You no longer have endless hours to overthink or emotionally process someone else's behavior. You are learning, building, and becoming. Growth fills the spaces that were once occupied by anxiety and self-doubt. And because narcissists rely on your availability, emotionally and mentally, your fullness feels like abandonment to them, even though it is simply self-development. Growth also changes how you see yourself. You stop defining your value through someone else's approval. Achievements, discipline, and consistency begin to rebuild your confidence in ways that cannot be taken away. You see evidence of your capability in real time. This evidence is grounding. It reminds you that you are competent, resilient, and evolving. A narcissist cannot compete with evidence because evidence does not argue back. There is something deeply confronting about watching someone thrive without you, especially if you once believed they would fall apart. Narcissists often expect their absence to break you. They assume regret will make you chase them or prove your loyalty. But when growth replaces desperation, the expected outcome collapses. Your life does not shrink, it expands. And that expansion becomes a mirror reflecting what they lack. As growth continues, your standards rise naturally. You no longer tolerate chaos disguised as passion. You no longer accept inconsistency as love. This is not because you are bitter, but because growth refines discernment. You recognize what drains you and what nourishes you. This awareness protects your future relationships. And protection is something you once outsourced to someone else instead of offering yourself. Growth is also deeply connected to joy, real joy, not relief from tension. You laugh without fear. You rest without guilt. You enjoy moments without scanning for emotional danger. This kind of joy is foreign to narcissists because it is not dependent on validation. When they see you joyful without them, it challenges their belief that they were essential to your happiness. What makes growth the loudest response is that it does not seek an audience. You are not trying to prove anything. You are simply living, and living well becomes the message. You do not need to announce that you have moved on. Your life communicates it. This quiet confidence is disarming. There is no argument to engage with, no emotion to provoke, no insecurity to exploit. Over time, growth reshapes your identity in ways that feel irreversible. You become someone who chooses intention over impulse, peace over drama, depth over intensity. These choices compound. Your life gains momentum, opportunities align, relationships improve, and while you may not be watching, somewhere the contrast becomes undeniable. The person who once tried to diminish you now sees you standing taller, stronger, and more complete. This is where regret often forms that, oh, you may never witness it directly. Narcissists regret not because they feel remorse in a healthy way, but because they lost access to something valuable. They lost influence. They lost relevance. They lost a version of you that made them feel powerful. Growth takes that away without confrontation. The most important part of this keynote is understanding that growth is not about making them feel anything. The moment growth becomes a strategy to provoke regret, it loses its purity. True growth is self-directed. It is rooted in your own healing, purpose, and vision. Any external reaction is incidental. As you continue growing, you eventually reach a point where their opinion no longer carries emotional weight. You remember the past without being pulled back into it. You acknowledge the lesson without reopening the wound. This is maturity. This is integration. And this is freedom. In the end, growth does not shout. It does not explain. It does not seek validation. It simply moves forward. And forward movement is something a narcissist cannot control, rewrite, or follow unless they are willing to face themselves. That is why growth remains the loudest response of all. It speaks in outcomes, in peace, in confidence, and in a life that no longer revolves around what once tried to break you. There comes a moment in healing when you realize that the deepest chain was not the relationship itself, but the need to be understood by the person who hurt you. You wanted them to finally see your heart, acknowledge your pain, and admit the damage they caused. This desire is human and understandable, but with a narcissist, it becomes a trap. The seventh keynote reveals a hard but liberating truth. Indifference is not cruelty, it is freedom. For a long time, you may have tried to explain yourself in different ways, hoping one version of the truth would finally reach them. You spoke calmly, then emotionally, then logically. You waited for the moment they would say, "I get it now." But that moment rarely comes because understanding you would require them to confront themselves. Narcissists protect their self-image at all costs, and that protection often comes at the expense of empathy. When you accept this, you stop exhausting yourself trying to be seen by someone who refuses to look. Indifference does not mean you suddenly stop feeling. It means your feelings are no longer directed towards someone who cannot handle them responsibly. You stop measuring your worth by whether they understand you. You stop needing their acknowledgement for your pain to be valid. This shift is subtle but profound. Your emotional energy, once tied to their perception of you, returns to you. At first, indifference may feel wrong. You may confuse it with bitterness or emotional shutdown. But true indifference is calm, not cold. It is the absence of emotional charge, not the presence of hostility. You do not wish them harm. You simply no longer center them in your emotional world. Their opinions stop carrying the weight they once did. Their silence no longer triggers anxiety. Their words no longer define your mood. This is where freedom begins, when you no longer need to be understood by them. You are no longer emotionally negotiating. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop wondering how you could have said things differently. You stop trying to control their narrative about you. You accept that they may never understand you. You let that be okay. That acceptance is powerful. From the narcissist's perspective, this indifference is deeply unsettling. They are accustomed to being emotionally significant, even if that significance comes from conflict. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop seeking validation, they feel a loss of importance. They may attempt to provoke a response, misinterpret your indifference as arrogance, or accuse you of being heartless. But these reactions only confirm that your emotional detachment has shifted the dynamic. Indifference also restores your clarity. You begin to see the relationship without emotional fog. You recognize patterns that once confused you. You understand that many arguments were not misunderstandings, but power struggles. This clarity brings peace. You stop romanticizing the past. You stop questioning your decision to move forward. You trust yourself. As indifference deepens, your emotional life becomes more stable. You are no longer riding highs and lows based on someone else's behavior. Your mood is less reactive. Your peace is more consistent. This stability is not dull, it is grounding. It allows you to invest fully in relationships that are reciprocal, respectful, and safe. There's also a quiet dignity that comes with indifference. You no longer feel the need to prove your goodness, your loyalty, or your intentions. You know who you are, and that knowing is enough. When criticism comes, it passes through you instead of lodging inside you. When praise comes, it is appreciated but not required. You become internally anchored. Indifference does not erase the past, but it repositions it. The memories lose their emotional charge. You can think about what happened without being pulled back into pain or anger. This emotional neutrality is a sign of healing, not avoidance. It means the wound is closed enough that touching it no longer causes bleeding. The ultimate irony is that indifference often creates the strongest reaction in a narcissist. They expect anger, grief, or longing. They do not expect calm disinterest, because indifference signals that they no longer have access to your inner world. And access was the true power they once held. In the end, indifference is not about them at all. It is about you reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. You decide where your feelings go. You decide who gets to matter. You decide what deserves your attention. And in making those decisions consciously, you step into a freedom that cannot be manipulated. When you no longer need to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, you are released from the need to perform, explain, or justify your existence. That releases peace. That peace is strength. And that strength marks the moment you truly moved on. There comes a stage in healing where anger begins to feel heavy, not empowering. At first, anger protected you. It helped you recognize injustice. It gave you the strength to step away. But if held too long, anger becomes another chain, tying you emotionally to the very person you are trying to leave behind. This is where the eighth keynote enters with clarity and depth. Forgiveness is not reconciliation, it is release. Forgiveness has been misunderstood, misused, especially by those who benefit from avoiding accountability. You may have been pressured to forgive quickly, to move on, to be the bigger person while your wounds were still open. That version of forgiveness feels unfair and unsafe because it asks you to dismiss your pain. True forgiveness does the opposite. It acknowledges the harm fully and then makes a conscious decision not to carry it forward. Forgiveness does not mean what happened was acceptable. It does not mean the person deserves access to you again. It does not mean trust is restored or consequences disappear. Forgiveness simply means you are done allowing what they did to define your emotional future. You stop letting their actions live rent-free in your mind. You choose freedom over fixation. At first, forgiveness may feel like letting them win, but in reality, holding on to resentment keeps you tied to them emotionally. Every replayed memory, every imagined conversation, every surge of anger keeps the connection alive. Forgiveness cuts that cord, not dramatically, but decisively. It says, you no longer get to shape my inner world. This kind of forgiveness begins internally. You allow yourself to feel the anger without acting on it. You stop judging yourself for still being hurt. You recognize that forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Some days you feel free. Other days the pain resurfaces. This does not mean you failed. It means healing is layered. Each time you choose release over resentment, you loosen the grip a little more. Forgiveness also extends inward. You forgive yourself for staying too long, for missing red flags, for hoping things would change. Self-forgiveness is often harder than forgiving the other person because it challenges your sense of judgment. But you made decisions based on the information, emotions, and capacity you had at the time. Blaming yourself keeps the wound open. Compassion closes it. For a narcissist, forgiveness without reconciliation is confusing and threatening. They expect forgiveness to mean access. They expect release to mean reset. When you forgive but do not return, you disrupt that expectation. You demonstrate that forgiveness is not weakness but discernment. You show that peace does not require proximity. This is where many people struggle. They fear that forgiving without reconciling makes them cold or unforgiving. But reconciliation requires two people taking responsibility. Forgiveness requires only one person choosing freedom. You can forgive someone and still decide they are not safe to be close to. These truths can coexist. As forgiveness settles in, you begin to feel lighter. The emotional charge around the memory softens. You can remember without reliving. You can acknowledge the lesson without reopening the wound. This emotional neutrality is not denial, it is integration. The experience becomes part of your story, not the center of it. Forgiveness also shifts your focus forward. Instead of asking why they did what they did, you be. Jen asking how you want to live now. Your energy moves from analysis to intention. You invest more in the present, more in people who show up with honesty and care. The past no longer demands your attention the way it once did. There is a quiet power in forgiving without announcing it. You do not need to tell them. You do not need their acknowledgement. Forgiveness happens within you. It is a private decision that restores your autonomy. And autonomy is something a narcissist never wanted you to fully have. Over time, forgiveness changes how you carry yourself. Your tone softens, your reactions slow, you are less easily triggered. This does not mean you are passive. It means you are grounded. You respond from wisdom rather than wounds. This groundedness protects you from repeating the same dynamics in the future. In the end, forgiveness is not about giving them peace. It is about giving yourself permission to move on unburdened. It is about choosing not to let the worst thing someone did to you become the heaviest thing you carry. When forgiveness becomes release, not reconciliation, you reclaim your future. And in that release, something remarkable happens. The person who once had the power to hurt you becomes a lesson instead of a sentence. The pain becomes knowledge, the anger becomes clarity, and you step forward lighter, wiser, and free. There is a moment when healing moves from intention to embodiment, and that moment is revealed through consistency. The ninth keynote is not about what you say you have learned, but about what you repeatedly choose when faced with familiar triggers. Consistency is where transformation becomes real, because it proves that growth is no longer theoretical. It has become who you are. After leaving a narcissistic dynamic, there is often a testing phase. The person may reappear unexpectedly, send a message, offer nostalgia, or create a crisis designed to pull you back into old roles. This is not coincidence. Narcissists test boundaries to see if access still exists. They look for emotional openings, moments of weakness, or familiar patterns they can exploit. Consistency is what closes those openings permanently. Consistency means you do not respond differently just because you feel lonely, nostalgic, or momentarily unsure. It means you do not re-explain old wounds hoping for a different response. It means you do not step back into conversations that once drained you, even when curiosity or guilt whispers that maybe this time will be different. Each consistent choice strengthens your new identity. At first, consistency requires conscious effort. You remind yourself why you left. You remember how it felt to lose yourself. You resist the urge to seek comfort from the very source of pain. This resistance is not denial, it is self-protection. And with each repetition, it becomes easier. What once felt like restraint begins to feel like self-respect. Consistency also applies to how you treat yourself. You maintain boundaries not only with them, but within your own habits. You stop romanticizing the past. You stop consuming information that reopens wounds. You stop engaging in self-talk that blames or diminishes you. This internal consistency is just as important as external boundaries because it prevents emotional relapse. For the narcissist, consistency is disorienting. They expect emotional fluctuation. They anticipate moments when you will soften, explain, or engage. When those moments do not come, they are forced to confront a reality they dislike. The dynamic has changed permanently, not temporarily, not emotionally, permanently. This realization often marks the end of their attempts. Consistency communicates finality without confrontation. You do not need to argue, announce, or defend. Your decision, your repeated behavior becomes the message. It says, the door is closed, not out of anger, but out of clarity. This kind of closure is undeniable because it is lived, not spoken. Inside you, consistency builds trust. You begin to trust your own decisions. You see that you can feel emotions without acting on them impulsively. You realize that discomfort passes. You learn that strength is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to stay aligned with your values, even when emotions rise. This self-trust becomes a foundation for future stability. There is also empowerment and predictability. When your actions align with your values consistently, your life feels less chaotic. You know how you will respond in challenging situations. This predictability is not rigidity, it is reliability. And reliability within yourself creates peace. You are no longer at war with your impulses. Consistency also prevents rewriting history. When you stay consistent, you do not give space for doubt to creep in. You do not ask yourself whether you overreacted or imagined the harm. Your actions affirm your truth. Each consistent boundary reinforces the reality of what you experienced and why you chose to move on. As time passes, the emotional charge around the narcissist fades. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because consistent distance allowed healing to take root. The absence of new wounds gives old ones space to close. You stop feeling pulled back into the past. The present becomes safer, calmer, and more grounded. The ultimate power of consistency is that it transforms your identity. You are no longer someone who knows what to do but struggles to do it. You become someone who follows through. This follow-through reshapes how you see yourself. You respect yourself more because you keep your word to yourself. From the outside, it may look like nothing dramatic happened, but internally, everything has changed. You are no longer available for the dynamics that once defined you. And that unavailability is not situational, it is structural. It is built into who you have become. In the end, consistency is the proof that healing has taken hold. It is the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to revisit old battles to confirm their strength. The old patterns no longer have access because you no longer answer their call. And in that steadfast alignment, your transformation becomes undeniable. There comes a final and decisive shift where the focus is no longer on what they did, what they lost, or what they feel, but on who you have become. The 10th keynote reveals the deepest truth of all. Your wholeness becomes the ultimate consequence, not because you intended it to be, but because nothing unsettles a narcissist more than realizing they are no longer central to your story. Wholeness is different from happiness. Happiness can fluctuate. Wholeness is stable. It is the feeling of being complete within yourself, no longer fragmented by self-doubt, fear, or emotional dependence. When you reach this state, you are not trying to prove anything. You are not trying to win. You are simply living from a place of inner alignment, and that alignment quietly rewrites the power dynamic forever. A narcissist needs to feel significant. They need to believe they shaped you, defined you, or diminished you. When you are whole, they lose that illusion. You no longer revolve around what they think, feel, or say. Their approval no longer fuels you. Their criticism no longer wounds you. This loss of relevance is profound because it strikes at the core of their identity. Wholeness means you have integrated the pain instead of running from it. You no longer deny what happened, but you also no longer live inside it. The experience becomes a lesson rather than a sentence. You extract wisdom without reopening wounds. This integration gives you a quiet confidence. You know what you survived, and you know what you will never tolerate again. As you become whole, your life gains coherence. Your decisions align with your values. Your relationships feel safer and more reciprocal. You are no longer drawn to intensity that disguises itself as intimacy. You choose consistency, honesty, and peace. This shift is not dramatic, but it is unmistakable. Your life feels grounded rather than chaotic. From the narcissist's perspective, this wholeness is deeply confronting. They may look at you and realize that you did not collapse without them. You did not remain stuck. You did not carry bitterness like a badge. Instead, you evolved, and evolution exposes the truth they try hardest to avoid. They were not the source of your strength, and they are not the center of your world. Wholeness also changes how you remember the past. You no longer romanticize the good moments to excuse the harm. You no longer demonize yourself for staying. You see the full picture with compassion and clarity. This balanced perspective is a sign of maturity. It means the emotional charge has dissolved. And when the charge dissolves, control disappears. One of the most powerful aspects of wholeness is that it does not announce itself. You do not need to tell anyone how healed you are. You do not need to explain your growth. Your presence carries it. Your calm carries it. Your boundaries carry it. This quiet strength is something a narcissist cannot compete with because it does not engage in comparison. Wholeness also restores your future. You stop unconsciously recreating old dynamics. You recognize manipulation early. You trust your instincts. You walk away faster from disrespect. This is no fear-based avoidance. It is wisdom-based choice. Your standards rise not out of pride, but out of self-respect. At this stage, even the desire to make them regret fades, not because the pain was insignificant, but because your life has become significant again. You are no longer measuring healing by their reaction. You are measuring it by your peace, and peace becomes your new reference point. The irony is this: when you are whole, regret may arise on their side without you ever knowing. They may realize too late what they lost. They may feel the emptiness of no longer having access to you. But by then, it no longer matters. Their realization does not add to your life, and its absence does not take away from it. Wholeness means you are no longer defined by opposition. You are not living to prove them wrong. You are living to honor yourself. This shift marks the true end of the story, not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with completion. In the end, your wholeness is the greatest consequence because it cannot be undone. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be reclaimed by anyone else. You belong fully to yourself again. And when someone who once needed to control you realizes they no longer matter in your inner world, that realization becomes the final silent lesson. You did not need to hurt them back. You did not need to explain yourself one last time. You simply became whole. And that is the ending they never expected.